Chapter 9 Birthplace. For a second, in the moonlight under the trees, Fritha did not recognize Wolf, when suddenly she knew him. But instead of crying out in relief, she covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. Siniag put his arms around her in comfort and looked over her bowed head at the others. "How good to find you, Wolfson, my friend. Why are you here? Were you sent after us? With a message, perhaps? Are we to return?" At this, Fritha cried out in utter misery. "We have lost our home. We have nothing, nothing." Wolfson took Siniag by the arm. "We have a camp and a fire and some food. Come, you need to rest." He led the way through the undergrowth. Siniag followed, his arms around the still sobbing Fritha. Wolf, dazed and anxious, followed behind. They came to the camp, and Wolfson made a soft place of last year's leaves and heather for Fritha to lie on. He made Siniag sit by the fire. He gave them both water and divided what was left of the bread, keeping back some for the morning. Siniag was hungry, but too good a campaigner to eat all he was offered. "I have some provisions left. I'll take some of your bread to put with the mutton and salt." Fritha would not eat, but she drank the water thankfully. "Now tell us," said Wolfson. Siniag groaned and struck his forehead with his fist. "Fritha has told you. We have no longer a home. Everything is lost. I have not even a weapon save my knife." "But how, friend? How?" "All of the farm that was mine is destroyed, the dwelling place, the barn, the byre. The cattle are slain and the geese. There is nothing on my land but a pile of ashes." Wolf was sitting beside Fritha now, and she leaned against his shoulder in an exhausted way. "We saw the smoke before we reached the place," Siniag said. "We were nearly home. We were light-hearted and content as never before. God was with us then. It was God who warned us through Assuage. She had gone home before you then? She was ahead of us by an hour or more, so she was the first to see it. And when she saw, she came hurrying back. 'Go,' she said. 'Go, Siniag, and take Fritha, and do not return this way.' At first Siniag had thought she must be mad, for her manner was wild, her eyes staring with fear and dread. 'Hardra has burned your home,' she had cried. 'Hardra has done it, my husband, Hardra. Go at once, or he will kill you and give Fritha by force to Uthra.' 'I saw the smoke,' said Siniag, rising up white in the moonlight, 'but I turned at once. I could think only of my daughter.' We ran into the shelter of some trees, and Assuage ran after us, crying out that Hardra would kill me because I am a Christian. Then I urged her to come with us. She would not. 'I love my son,' she kept saying. 'I cannot leave my son.' Then she was gone, and I knew all my care must be for Fritha. So we left the road and hid in the ruins of a temple. Already there was a sound of men hurrying along the road, and I feared it might be Hardra and perhaps others he had roused up against me. So through the night we stayed in hiding, and in the morning we went to Canterbury. The brothers gave us food and comforted us, and Brother Adrian told us you had set out some hours before. You were going on a mission to your birthplace, he said." Siniag paused. It seemed as though he had come to a part of his story which he could hardly endure to relate. Sitting beside Wolf, Fritha began to cry, but quietly and sadly, not as she had wept before. At last Siniag continued. "I thought we would stay in Canterbury, Wolfson, but we had been there little more than an hour when a boy came running to the city from our home. He said that Hardra had killed Assuage in his fury, and that he was setting about him like a madman. Then I knew I must take my daughter away from that place. I felt certain you would take the road I had told you of. It seemed to me that if we could find you, then we might make a new home in the place you were going to, for you would speak for us to your people. And since we are now Christians, it might be, I thought, that we too could tell them of the true faith. If they chose to kill us, better death that way than at the hand of my brother. Better the chance of life than the certainty of death. Thanks be to Almighty God that you are here," said Wolfson. "There are perils ahead, but we will meet them together. Rest now. Wolf and I will keep guard." Fritha lay down with a sigh of weariness, but of relief too. Wolf pulled off his own rough cloak and laid it over her. He felt as he had when his mother died, that he had grown years older in as many minutes. "Go to sleep," he said to her, quite sternly. But he could not help asking, "How did you find our track after the road ended?" She was already drowsing. "The hare's skin," she mumbled. "The bird's feathers." She was asleep. When morning came, Wolfson and Siniag took counsel together. Although the party was now strengthened, there were also twice as many to feed, and they did not know how far they were from any village. It was too early in the year to find much help in the hedgerows. There would be no fruit or nuts for many months yet, nor any fungi. When they had had their breakfast that morning, there was only a little bread left. It was a fine morning, and all about them the forest was thick and quiet, save for the birds about their own affairs and the scuttling of small animals among the grass. Before they left the place where they had made their camp, they gave thanks for a safe night and prayed for help during the coming day. Then they rose and set off again, making due west on Wulfstan's instructions. Fritha had recovered her spirits after a night's sleep. The disaster of her lost home was behind her, and she was content to be here with Wulf and his father. Also, she was buoyant with the new faith she had taken upon her, and although in the sunlight she looked once more the tousled girl Wulf had caught spying on the seashore, she had as well an air of gentle contentment that was new. They walked on through the forest, Wulfstan leading, Siniag after him, Wulf and Fritha in the rear, walking together. Fritha began to chatter and laugh. "Be silent, girl," Siniag said at last, stopping to frown at her. "We do not know who's about. You make as much noise as a dozen magpies." Fritha was silent once more, but she looked at Wulf and had difficulty in stifling her laughter. After that they conversed in dumb show, and they were often half breathless as they tried not to laugh. In about half an hour from noon they saw signs of the movement of men. There was a trodden walk, and some timber had been cleared. They followed this warily and came upon a circle of grass, in its midst a huge tree. The tree was an ash, and when Wulfstan saw it he flung out his arms as though he would protect the others following behind him. But it was too late, for even Fritha had seen that something dangled in the bare branches, from which there rose up lazily 3 great black birds to circle overhead. "What is it, Wulf?" But she knew as well as he, though she had never seen such a thing before. Hereabouts, then, still lingered one of the oldest religions that had come from the north. This ash tree was Drasil, the tree of the gods, planted by Woden and his brothers, and in the branches hung all that remained of a human sacrifice left there to die. "Pass by quickly," Wulfstan commanded, "and pray to God as you go." They ran by the tree and were away on a long slope leading through many untouched oak trees that made up a sacred grove. After a time they came to a little river running in a gorge. This would have been a good place to rest and eat, but Wulfstan insisted that they leave the trees far behind. So it was long after noon before they found another place, and with a river too. They rested and drank and ate what was left of the food. They must catch something for their supper that night. "Men have been here," Siniag said suddenly. Sure enough, there were trees lopped and waiting to be dragged away, and the undergrowth was trampled. Wulfstan looked about him in silence for a long while. He seemed to be measuring the distances, looking to the sun for guidance. He walked 100 yards or so to prospect from atop of a small hill. Then he came back to the others, who were watching him silently. They saw at once that there was an excitement in his manner, that his eyes shone, and he was pale. "This could be the place," he said in a low voice. "It could be the river that I knew when I was a boy, when I was a young man. Who knows? In another hour I may look upon my home. And mine, father. And yours. Your birthplace, Wulf." Wulfstan smiled at his son, but sadly. "You have a look of your mother that I never noticed until now." After that he was silent for a long time, and walked away by himself. He stood with his head bowed. He was thinking of the cruelly short years they had been together. The others respected his memories and kept to themselves, but the suspense was great. It needed only a brisk march now, if Wulfstan was right, to reach the village and discover the best or worst that was to befall them. At last Wulfstan came to himself again and returned to the rest. "I am sure we are in God's hand. He has led us here. With every moment I am more certain we must go forward, and God's will be done." "So be it," they agreed, and started on their way. Now they were all silent. Fritha no longer even gestured meaning to Wulf, but sometimes took his hand for support as they moved beside the river, treading on an increasingly clear track where not only trees had been cut, but brushwood had been hauled away. Suddenly the trees thinned away, and they were looking down toward a clearing, with dwellings and a stockade. Almost at once there came a sound that made Wulfstan lift up his head. In spite of the uncertainties that seemed to press up to them from all sides, Wulfstan smiled broadly. He caught Siniag's arm, as if urging him to listen. For the sound was the sound of iron being hammered, and it was many a long year since Wulfstan had heard it. It rang in his ears like a song. It was the sound above all others that he remembered from his youth. This, indeed, was homecoming. The village itself was quiet. At first it seemed deserted. Then, as they moved carefully among the dwelling places, they came upon a circle of a dozen or more women pounding metal. For a second the women stared at them blankly. Then one of them began to scream. Instantly there was confusion. The women ran in all directions, all save one old woman who was clearly blind. She still sat with the pounding stone in her hand, her face tilted upward, waiting for what might happen. Fritha pushed past her father and went to the old woman's side, crouching down close. "Grandmother, we are friends," she said. She said it again and again. At last the old woman laid down the stone, which all this time she had held as though it were a weapon, and put her hand on Fritha's. The woman must have run off to find help, for suddenly a dozen or more men came swarming back into the clearing, with knives and staves in their hands. A dark, tallish man seemed to be their leader. When he saw Fritha, he paused, gesturing the rest to stop where they were behind him. He stood frowning at Fritha, trying to find reason in the presence of a young girl among hostile strangers. Behind the leader and the other men, the women crept back and stood in an inquisitive group. Now the children appeared from nowhere and clustered around their mothers, pointing and chattering. The leader took a couple of paces toward them and spoke to Wolfstan. "Who are you? Why do you come?" "My name is Wolfstan. This is the place where I was born, and my father before me. Your father was named—" "He was Wolfbert. My wife is E, whose father was Berthold, was killed hunting. I was taken from here, and E, my wife, and my son, who stands here beside me, were sold into slavery." He saw them frowning and staring. They seemed to have difficulty in following his words, and a muttering and a questioning broke out among them. He saw that they were slower witted than he had expected, and knew that because he had been taken to far places, he had learned without knowing it. He had bettered himself. These were savages still by comparison with himself and Siniag, though the leaders had great presence. Wolfstan pointed to the old woman. "This might be my grandmother, save that I know she must have perished on that day the raiders came." Again the leader frowned, and again he asked, "Why do you come?" "I am a friend. I am a son of this soil that bred you. All here are friends. I am Wolfstan, son of Wolfbert. Here is Siniag, out of Kent, and Siniag's daughter. Here is my only son. We ask shelter and food. I lived here and worked the iron. I lived here before I was taken for a slave. If so, how are you here now? I was saved by God the Father of all, a great God, God Almighty, greater than any God you know." This made them scowl again and mutter to one another. One of them even moved forward threateningly, but he was pulled back by another. Just then one of the women called out a name. Everyone turned, and a newcomer strode in. He came toward the group, and instantly the man who had been leader until now fell back and deferred to him. He stared at the travelers, asking quick, short questions as he did so, and being answered as shortly by the rest. Wolf, standing beside his father, felt relieved when he saw this man. For one thing, he felt that he knew him. That was absurd, of course, but there was something about him familiar and comforting. He was about 20, fair, fresh-faced, with keen eyes in an intelligent face. Compared with the rest, he seemed a sage in wisdom. Frowning a little, he approached Wolfstan, then stood looking at him deeply. "They say you were born here, that you were taken in a raid that carried off men and women alike, that killed others, that burned the village. What do you say you are called?" "I am Wolfstan, son of Wolfbert." "There was such a disaster as you speak of. I was a boy then. My mother hid me, but my father and my brothers died or were captured." "What was the name of your father's second brother?" "He was called Wolfegg." "I am his son. I am Sigwolf." He held out his hands. "We are kinsmen."